Hi everyone, welcome. What we are going to do in our next iteration, the next problem is to do the average grade calculator. So what we're going to do is load in grades from a TXT file, determine what the average from all those grades that we see are, and then write it out to a file that we can see here. And now I have the solution of the TXT file here. You can see here that each student kind of has an average like that. And what we're going to do is actually read in each of these from this grades.txt folder. So what we can do now for our average calculator is to go ahead and double check what we want our init to do. So our init should take in a self and a file name of grades.txt, and essentially it should also have a list of grades for students. So what we could say here is I'm going to say self.student grades, and I'm going to go ahead and set that to an empty list that we're taking in. So every time we make an average calculator, it's going to make an empty list of grades. And of course, if we don't specify this file name, it's just going to default to grades.txt, which is what we're given in. And now we have this function called load grades. So load grades should open the file and read in a lists of student grades. A line in the file represents the grades for one student, returns true if successful or not. So there's a few keywords I want to showcase here. And the main one here is this list of lists. So essentially, what we want to do is for each, go ahead and open this back up. Each time we read in these files here, we should attribute each of the attributes that we have, or excuse me, this guy should be a list, this one should be a list, and this one should be a list, and they should all be contained within a list that is most likely our self.studentGrades list. So to go ahead and get started, why don't we try to open this file? File is equal to open, and I'm going to open my file name, and I'm going to open it in my reading mode, and I'm just going to say print error, and I'll return false if this does not work out too well. And now, for the time being, I'm just going to return true down here. And what I'll do in between here is I'm going to say, okay, well, how do I figure out how to make this a list of each of these objects? So most likely what we could start off with is to say content is equal to file.read. And what I'll do here is I'm going to print out content after I open this up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, I'm going to hard code in a variable like A here. And then I'm just going to say load grades of A, like so. And it seems like we're getting an error. So for the time being, let's go ahead and try to actually get rid of these tries and accepts to see what error we're getting. And let's see here. We have a file name not defined. Oh, why is our file name not defined? I forgot to put in myself right in front of it. So make sure you remember the self. And now we can see here that our average calculator has no attribute file name. And why is that happening? Well, it looks like in my attribute list up here, I forgot to create an attribute that is called file name. Cool. So now I get all the contents of the file printed out for me, which is good, but remember that what we needed was a list of lists. So essentially, after load grades is done, I should have an entire list of objects that contains 3 separate lists for each student. So what I want to do next is to try to split up this file into individual list items. And how can we do that? Well, let's kind of experiment here. What I want to do first is why don't we try to split content? Let's just do a content.split, and then I'm going to print content, and let's see what this does for me. And it seems like, okay, we're kind of there. We've already printed out a list object, but you'll notice that it's kind of not what we wanted because each of these guys are within, each of these guys are within an individual list. So essentially, instead of this being individual array accesses, there are entire strings. And this isn't really what we want. So what if we go ahead and we try to use a comma here to split up this one? And this looks better. It seems like we're getting each of these lines, but it also seems like we have a /n within here as well. So what we could try to do here is essentially make each of these elements into an individual list, and then append each of those lists into our overall self.studentGrades. So to actually try to do that, let's just do for grade in content, let's go ahead and print our grade. Let's see what happens when we do it this way. And excellent, we are getting every single grade printed out. And let's go ahead and see what we get if I just do a normal split. And now this looks a little bit better, actually. It seems like we're getting the entire string of each of these guys printed out for us. And to actually go ahead, why don't we try to print out the type of grade in this scenario? And awesome. Each of these are a string. So what I might be able to do here, instead of trying to fiddle around with, okay, how do I determine how when my list ends and everything, I can actually just try to split within my for loop and make a list here. So why don't I try to do grade is equal to grade dot split, and why don't I try to reprint out what grade is this time? And cool, look at this. Now I'm getting a list, and it seems like each of these guys are still a full string here. So how do I split that to be an individual list here? Well, what if I try to use my comma that's right there? So let me try to use my comma. Excellent. Now I'm getting this type of list that I can kind of work with a bit better, right? So now I have the all the students' grades within this list of an object. And now we're thinking, okay, well, this is just an individual list, right? So I have one list here. I have my second list here and my third list here. How do I make a list of lists? Well, grade, remember, when we printed out the type of grade, it's actually a type of list. And what did we make earlier? Self.student grades. So what I can say here is I'm going to append to student grades the list grade. And let me go ahead and get rid of some of these print statements here. And after I do all of this, I'm going to print out self.student grades. And now you'll see here that I have a list of lists. And essentially, this is my list attribute at index 0 of my overall list. This is my list at index 1, and this is my list at index 2. And now I can probably iterate through them a lot easier. So now that's probably what we need to do for load grades. A line into file, or excuse me, reads in a list of students grade. And now we have essentially a list that we can work with for each of these student grades inside of our self.student grades. And now we can use this to try to calculate a bit more. So I'm going to say return true after we did this. I'm going to toss back in my try and accept statements here really quickly, just in case any issues happen. Print incorrect file. This will be a return false, and then otherwise accept, turn false like that. Excuse me. And now what we can try to do is figure out how do I get the right, get student averages and get course average. So now what I can say here is before we go ahead and we write our letter grades, we're most likely going to need to get the student averages and then get the course averages. So to get the student averages, we remember that our self.student grades contains a list of lists. So what I need to do here is essentially for grade list in self.student grades. And now you'll see here that I have a list for grade list in self.student grades. And if I print out grade list like so, and let me do a.get student averages now in my automation down here, we'll see here that I'm printing out each of the lists that are there. And now what I can do here is actually iterate through each of the items inside of my grade list. So for grade and grade list. And now if I print out my grade here, now you'll see that I'm getting 80, 90, 50, 70, 100. So this is actually a nested list that I'm using. If you didn't use a nested list, that's fine. You can kind of manually code in the 0 to 1 to 2, but in this scenario, I'm using a nested one in case we add more grades to this. And what can we do after we go ahead and calculate these guys? Well, what we can say now is I'm going to go ahead and put in a total right now. I'm going to set this to 0. And what I'm going to say is I'm actually going to, in each iteration of my for loop on the outer for loop, I'm going to say current student average. And what I'm going to set this to is 0. So essentially what's going to happen here is that this for loop will run, this becomes 0, and then this for loop will run throughout each item in the list, and then this gets reset to 0. Now, why do I have these two different variables? Well, let's go ahead and try to see what happens here. What I want to do is for my current student average, what I want it to do is for every grade plus equals grade, I'm going to go ahead and put this to be the total amount of the items in this list. And what I'll do here is after this for loop, in the inner for loop runs, I'm going to print this out. Let's see here. Oops, and it looks like that these are all strings still, which is my fault. So I'm just going to quickly change this to an int. Cool. And now you'll see here I get 390, 332, and 500. And let's go ahead and try to do a calculation really quick. My first one is 390. I guess I could just use Python. I do 80 plus 90 plus, plus 50 plus 70 plus 100. Cool, so that's working. These other guys should work for us as well. Excellent. So this is kind of adding up all these guys. And now we're wondering, well, what's the point of us adding up all of these when I get my current student average? Well, what I want to do essentially is say that my current average of all the grades of this list is now going to be equal to, and you know what, to actually make this a bit easier for us to understand, I'm going to set a new variable called sum of grades to 0. And what I'll say is the sum of grades will be plus equals this int of grade. And that just pretty much sums up all the grades we have. And the sum of grades is going to be divided by, and now again, what we do is to get the average, we add up all the items in a list and then we divide it by essentially how many items there are. How do I find how many items are in my list? Well, we remembered that grade list was this list of each individual student. And because it's a list, it has its length attribute. And now what I can say here is current student average is equal to sum of grades divided by the length of grades. Let me go ahead and print out that current student average. And it looks like I'm getting a 78, a 66.4. And then, let's see here, a 100 at the end. Now let's see if this is working out for us here. Am I doing my calculations correctly? If I get 78, 66.4 is C, 78 is C, 100 is A, cool. That looks like it's working out pretty well for us here. So now what can I do with this logic now? Well, we'll remember that we need to go ahead and this just gets each of the students' averages. So what we'll need to do here, and returns a list of averages of the student grades. So what should really happen here is essentially instead of total being a 0, I'm going to make total averages a list that's empty. And every time I get a current student average, I'm going to append the current student average into the overall list of averages that are there. Now let me go ahead and just return total averages for us to work with. And let's see here. Whoops, I didn't mean to do it like that. Cool. And now I'm actually going to print it as well because I didn't make it a variable that I'm going to call later. And it looks like I'm getting a list of these averages, which is what we wanted. Awesome. Now, what we could see here is get course average and returns the average of all the student grades. This is going to be much easier, right? So what we could say now here is if I want to get the course average, all I need to really call is I can say total averages on here is equal to self.get student averages. I'm going to call that method that I created earlier, or the function above me. And what I'm going to say here is I'm going to return, I'm going to say course average is equal to total averages divided by the length, or I could say the sum of total averages, essentially every item inside of my list summed up, divided by the length of my total averages. And now I'm going to print my course average. And now, okay, so I'm getting 78, 66.4, and 100. 78 plus 66.4 plus 100. This gives me 244.4. And now if I get the a.get course average, like so, it seems like I'm getting 81.466. So I'm going to say is 244.4 divided by 3. Excellent. I'm getting the same output here. So again, I'm manually calculating the averages here, but it's giving me the same output below here, just to make sure that it's working out. Awesome. So now after this guy is created, what all we need to really do now is go ahead and write these letter grades, and the write letter grades will go ahead and calculate and call the get student averages and the get course averages as well. Let's see here. let's just say the letter grades are written to a file named average dash grades, essentially, by the name of the file you read from. So, oh, sorry. So we're not going to hard code in the file name we're writing to. We are going to concatenate the name average dash in front of it. So what we'll need to do here essentially is we're going to try. Let me go ahead and try and accept. And what I'll do here is I'm going to say file is equal to open. And then what's the file name going to be? I'm going to concatenate the word average dash in front of the self.file name that I'm working with. So essentially, if self.file name is grades.txt, this will be average-grades.txt. And I'm going to write to this file. And what am I going to write to it? Well, I'm going to create a string to write here. And I'm going to set it to be empty. And now what my string to write will be is, first of all, I need to go ahead and try to get these student averages. And again, let me go ahead and instead of just printing this, I'm going to return the course average as well. I don't think we need to use course average in this scenario. Let's see here where we write the letter grades. But essentially, we'll go ahead and just try to make this do it manually. But inside of my write letter grades, what I'll say here is I'm going to go ahead and get my total average list that I need to work with. So I'm going to say total averages is equal to self.get student averages. And now I have this list of total averages, and essentially what I could say here is I'm going to say for grade in total averages, what I'm going to say is if grade, now I need to make sure if grade is if grade is less than 100 and grade is greater than 90, what does this tell us? This is kind of weirdly worded, excuse me. But essentially, if grade is less than 100 and grade is greater than 90, it's going to fall within the confines of an A. And what we want to do is write out the grade that we have and then the letter grade part of it. So what we could say here is in my string to write, I'm going to plus equals the letter A, or excuse me, the grade that I'm currently on, the string version of the grade I'm currently on, plus a colon, and then plus whatever grade that is. So maybe A, something like that. So I'm going to essentially convert the grade that I'm working on, that's an integer, into a string, and then concatenate the letter grade associated with it. Let's see here. We could just go ahead and say if grade is greater than 90, without this being A. That's the one that we were looking at. And now I could say here is elif grade is greater than 80 and grade is less than or equal to 89. What am I going to do now? Well, my string to write this time is going to be, instead of an A, it's going to be a B. And I can just keep doing this type of concept until I get down to my F here. So let me try and do it this way. Let me not do too much at once here. So let me 70 and then 79. Whoops, a daisy. 79. This will be a C. And now I'm going to say instead of 70, it'll be a 60 to 69, and this will be a D. And then if it's less than 60, else if it's less than 60, my string to write plus equals my string of my grade plus an F, because it is a failing grade. Awesome. Now, essentially here, if we try to run this guy, whoops, I need to put in an accept clause here. What I'm going to say, after I do all this, I'm also going to return true in this scenario, except return false if anything went wrong here. It's going to write it out for us. And now, let me go ahead and try to delete my average gauge file that I'm working with. I'm going to say a.write letter grades, like so. I get a true, my letter grades pops up, and it looks like nothing was written to it. Uh-oh. Looks like our code ran, but nothing happened at the end. What happened? Oh, I actually forgot to write to my file. So what I'm going to say is file.writes string to writes. Now, if I go ahead and I try to open up this guy again, whoops, delete him, and I'll say a.write letter grades, like so. I get a true this time. Let's look at it. Excellent. It looks like we're getting it okay, but what's happening here? It looks like it's all in the one line. So what's going on here? Oh, I know what's happening. It seems like every time that we're appending it, we're not putting any spacing or anything. So simply we can just put a slash n after each of these strings here, and then this should pretty much run for us here. Let's go ahead and run this guy. Cool. That's looking pretty neat. This one is giving us an 85 a B, 71. That's a different grade here. Let's take a look here. We get a 78 at C, 66.4 at D, 100 an A, and excellent. This one is working. Let's go ahead and try to manually mimic what's going on here. So we have C is equal to average calculator. Average calculator. C dot load grades. Looks like that, oops. We go ahead and close this guy off. We get a true. Theta get student averages. That's the method. Awesome. We got two prints, but that's not a bad deal. See that get course average. Okay, we get data 1.46. See that right letter grades. We get a true. Just got updated. This is working too. Awesome. So this is one way that you could approach doing this one. There's a lot of like inline stuff that's going on. I will say, like, for instance, right here, if this is confusing, it's totally fine to do another for loop up here and say like sum is equal to 0 for grade in total averages and stuff like that. You can do it that way, but there's also little shortcuts that really save the amount of time you have to use to go through all these items to find your solution. So again, this is one way you could do it, and I hope this helps. And in the next one, we'll be taking a look at the final one of mortgage calculator.